I've been asked to talk about the future directions for this wonderful sector of vocational education and training, and in some senses I guess I framed that in the opening discussion this morning. You would be aware there's an election on, and for people like me who have a short attention span, it is a very long period that we're going to have to listen to this for. So VET has featured a little bit in the election, so I'd like to talk about that. And that's a good thing, but ultimately it's about what's the direction. And if I start that, and can I say Western Australia has been a different marketplace than everywhere else. It's worked better here in terms of all elements of the market than it has in some states across the eastern seaboard, and I mean both vet fee help and state level funding, because vet fee help and Victoria are the two glaring examples of where some issues appeared, and there's certainly big issues. But if I asked you to draw a picture of what does the vet sector look like, and I mean something quite creative. When I was doing these types of sessions on the eastern seaboard, you know, they had a choice to come up with a real serene picture, beautiful beaches, everyone's calm, or an alternative, and most of them went with that, right? Now, I don't know who's driving the bus, but I don't think it was meant to be a positive insight. Now, you've got to ask yourself, when all of the evidence, and it's not my opinion, the numbers show that this sector has a long, proud history. This sector has been producing results, quality results, for a long time. I mentioned the 4 million in enrolments. Vet fee help. Now, that picture there is mainly about vet fee help, let's be really honest, and some of the Victorian reform. Of those 4 million, vet fee help's only 260,000 enrolments. Now, that's not meant to be flippant, because what happened in vet fee help's a major problem. But the providers that are having action taken against them, out of 4,600 in this country, there's less than 10. So it makes you wonder how this has become a crisis in confidence in our sector. And it has. It's really damaged the brand, if you like, over on the East Coast. Now, I don't know. I'd be interested in your perspective how much of that has washed through here. But the large majority of our fantastic colleges, public and private alike, have been doing the right thing and are continuing to engage with students and are producing really, really good results. So it's a frustration. Now, the media have an important role to play, and they've put a spotlight on it, if you like. But what they haven't targeted yet is the government role in that, for even allowing this to happen. So perhaps they're saving that up. But certainly the challenge for us now is to understand what's happened, and where do we go from here? What does the journey back to the Holy Land look like? Because VET has such a critical role to play. But let's just have a look at what some of the numbers show. Now, if Peter Noonan was here, he'd put up this diagram. I'm going to show you a bit of work of Peter's at the moment, because at the Mitchell Institute they've been unpacking the financing of our sector. Now, that's VET participation rates. Now, if you look at the Western Australian number there, or look at any of the other numbers, it shows it's going all over the place, year to year. Now, that's not how you build a future stock of skills for an economy. That's not how you build a sustainable industry and a sustainable sector for long-term quality skills and quality skills reform. It's all over the place. And why is that? Now, Simon eloquently described it as the vertical fiscal imbalance. Now, the definition of an expert is somebody who's just heard something that someone else hasn't. Unfortunately, you all heard that, so I can't claim the title. But if you look at what that means for VET funding shares, again, just look at the way the funding's moving about at the state level. You can see it's going up and down, but let me tell you, the work shows that largely at a state and territory level, and this is not state bashing, that's for sure, states are struggling to maintain investment levels in vocational education and training. Now, we've got some issues in the country around apprenticeships and traineeships, not so much trades. Trades have pretty much held on, and some trades have done quite well. But certainly in traineeships, there's significantly less being trained now under a traineeship model than there were. That's a funding issue as well. That's more Commonwealth driven probably. But certainly, if you're out there training, and whether you're a TAFE or whether you're a private provider, and you have this sense that money seems to be tight, well, it's because it is. It genuinely is. Now, you would know of the political outcry that would happen if you'd pulled money from schools, right? But VET, it happens, and we've got to ask ourselves, how do we continue to promote our sector so it becomes an important part of a funding environment? How do we ensure that ideology is taken out of a funding model for vocational education and training? Because that's the challenge, I think. Now, the next slide just shows you, again, Peter Noonan's work, not mine. It just shows you that how it compares to other sectors. And you'll note there's only one sector declining, and it's vocational education and training. And that's a dilemma, because skills cost money. Question?
I went to an ACPET forum, and when they brought in the new fees for WA, raised the issue that the increased fees would probably reduce in lower enrolments.
This is a student fee?
Yep. Because unemployed people or people on low income wouldn't be able to pay for that. And the minister's response was pretty much his WA wasn't responsible for jobs as far as unemployment. So the fact that there's a dislink between our ministers thinking that unemployment isn't an issue for the state, and yet they need vocational qualifications to get jobs, that there's definitely an issue there.
Yeah, fantastic question. Look, and politically I understand the answer that the Commonwealth's responsible for employment programs, but VET is vocational. The real strength of our sector is our relationships with industry, and I'll talk a little bit about what's happened in some parts of VHelp because those connections are lost. So you're right, a qualification and a qualification with integrity, all the data tells you will help you get a job and keep a job. I think the last time I saw the data was post-compulsory school qualification, Cert 3, you're 80% of those graduates, are in longer term employment. It drops down to under 50% if they don't finish school, so that's important as well. But you can just see the jumps, and income thresholds are as well. So that's my point. I want ideology out of our sector. Yes, I want to keep industry, if you like, driving the bus. That's if they are driving the bus. I think there's a question about that. But we want sustainable skills programs. If we want to be able to attract students, grow the student stock, but make sure they've got quality. We've made some mistakes there as well. But that's a very good question, and an alarming one in a sense. But student fees, why are government putting up student fees? It's not politically sexy, that's for sure. It's because they're struggling to fund the sector. And that's despite that growth of vet fee help that I talked about in the earlier session. So you can see there's some challenges there. So let's start unpacking where the media have been jumping on, again, less so in Western Australia, but certainly across on the eastern seaboard. Queensland's had problems, Victoria, South Australia certainly. So let's start looking at the numbers. I said to you earlier that that's the growth in vet fee help. I'm not sure I've been in this sector a long time, and I'm worried about quoting numbers now because NCVR's in the room, but we'll continue on regardless. No questions from you. So I'm not sure I've seen in vocational education, even higher ed, growth of that magnitude before. And I mentioned some providers earlier that had grown from $200,000 revenue to $150 million in a year. Now, if that was you, yeah, your accountant would be happy. But the challenge I'd have for you, a question perhaps I've got for you, is it possible to grow like that and keep control? Keep control of quality, keep supporting students, keep them engaged in the system. Now, the completion rates from the program perhaps say that it's not. But that's a challenge for us. The fees paid by kids and adults, again, $3 billion, and I'm told it's another 1.5 more than that now, or close to that. That's the forecast anyway. Unprecedented. This growth's unprecedented, hence why we've got a problem. And the problem is, whether you're TAFE, whether you're a quality private provider, whether you're a community education college, that hurts. So when people question the integrity of vocational education and training, that hurts the brand. And we need to learn from this, because I don't think we learnt last time. This same experiment happened in Victoria, same experiment where you had a laissez-faire, you'd call it the Adam Smith model. I get it, you know, the market mechanisms will adjust and fix it. Or it turns out that might not be the ideal approach. But the Commonwealth didn't seem to learn it. I'm not bashing the Commonwealth either, but there's some realities here, because it hurts what we do, it hurts our business. And it's a challenge. Now, completion rates are a complex thing, and can I acknowledge that completion's not everything in vet. You know, there are people that come in for a few competencies. You'd think less so at a diploma, but still, let's just accept the principle. But, you know, we've got colleges out there with completion rates under 1%. You know, how does that happen? I don't understand. I just don't understand how that happens. So, and I've already talked about the growth, and of course, the last one is about the tuition fee itself. So there has been a lot of growth in tuition fees as well. So the price a student might pay for qualification. Now that's harder to work out. That has to be set by the market in many senses. I'm nervous about the notion of government saying, let's set the price. Because I want you to be competing not just on price, but on innovation, on flexibility, different course offerings, student support. That doesn't happen in a highly regulated pricing model. Not saying that we shouldn't defend and protect people from outrageous prices, but there's other ways to deal with that as well. So, you know, I grapple with this stuff. I think I go through periods in my role where I think that's it. Like, I hide under my desk for the first hour or so, come out and see if the phone's still ringing, and then move on. Because, you know, the media say things like, well, Rod, you guys have dropped the ball. So what does that mean? Well, private providers have ripped all their students off. And you go, well, hang on a minute. Let's just look at the numbers. Let's look at how many colleges have been exposed. About 5, and I'm told there's a couple more to come. And by the way, no disrespect, but some of the TAFEs have grown faster than these private colleges. Sydney TAFE's 55,000 students in vet field, and most of them are in online. Outcomes aren't fantastic, but it shows there's some challenges here. That's not to blame TAFE. That's just to say everyone's in this new market trying to compete. Let's put some quality measures in place. So let's now just reflect on, I keep telling you that the sector's okay. No questions, Catherine. Right, this is data. I love the total vet activity data, by the way. I know there was nervousness in the private sector about reporting, not across the board, but about reporting privately funded or user pays numbers. It is perhaps the biggest change in the policy debate I've seen. And there's more analysis to come, there's more insight to come, the next range of data's coming in. It's powerful. It shows just how strong the sector is outside of government funding, which is good. And you know, they're the enrolments. It's pretty powerful stuff. Private providers delivered about 2.2 million of these enrolments, TAFE about 1 million. Now that's largely publicly funded. TAFE has a user pays system as well. So again, not just I don't believe it helps us to talk about should you fund TAFE or should you fund privates. I don't think that's the key question. Both have a really important role to play. But you know, 25% of the working age population had some participation in vocational education and training. Wow, that's really, really good. Now again, that participation's really different for different people. Not everyone did a qual. Some people did one competency. Then you think, oh, well, is that a failure? Well, no, the satisfaction ratings that I talked earlier say it's not failure. They go, no, that's all I wanted. Sure, we'd like to have a system where we encourage them. It's the old, dare I say it, lifelong learning. That's ultimately what we want from our sector, if we can culturally get that right. In terms of colleges, 4,600 providers across the country. Now, I hear different ministers say that's too many. I don't know what the algorithm is to work that out, but they've been around. I think there's about 2,600, 2,800 private providers. Now, the growth in private providers was sort of in the 10 years, late 90s, there was a real growth. But the last 5 years, it hasn't been that many new providers, but again, lots of change to corporate structures. So there's been some takeovers, there's been some buying providers, there's private equities out there buying colleges, and that's probably an experiment as we're watching it, but it is bringing investment to the table. You know, I saw a private provider open a facility in Sydney the other day, which was, in the media, they said it was worth $9 million. That's all good, quality facilities, as long as it's built on an absolute commitment to quality. That's probably all I care about. So then we go to the number of students in vet fee help? Again, small fraction, small fraction. So what's your view?
This just comes from experience that I saw an RTO go from charging $3,000 for a fee-for-service to $20,000 for a fee-for-service, and there were prerequisites for entry requirements, and they weren't being met before they were enrolled. And I just think I don't think that RTO's ever been pulled up for it either. So it's a kind of a and yet the owner was making all these bold statements how the business had grown two-thirds in 12 months, and yet the quality definitely wasn't there. So
a couple of elements to your question there. There's the price growth. Now, if a qualification's increased that much in price, you would hope, therefore, they've got all this extra stuff. You know, you can have product A, which is platinum, product B, which is economy. You know, but from I sense from your question that's not what happened. So, you know, that sort of growth again is hard to defend. I can't defend it. Most colleges, can I say, are not in that game, but that's what part of our problem. And whilst they might say, well, yeah, let's just continue on, it is going to have an impact on the 2017 system, which of course government's put a discussion paper out about, and they're entertaining price caps. In terms of the election, of course, the ALP has announced that they will have arbitrary price capping. Now, what we've said about that is we understand the importance of capping to protect students if required, but the notion of it's one price fits all does not make sense to me. The notion that it's 8,000. Okay. Now we know, I know courses that are cost, both public and private, that cost more than that. So does that mean that there's gap fees, there's upfront fees and that sort of stuff? So that's just a difficult science. But the quality one's the key. If those colleges had delivered a fantastic product, we would not even be sitting here talking about it. We'd be saying this is an education revolution. Because vet fee should have been that. We demanded student loans for a long time in vet. There's still a demand to drop it down, to say, well, hang on, what are you stopping at diploma for? Why can't a Certificate 4 student have a loan, a Certificate 3 student? Now, there's not a lot of weight to that argument at the moment, because I think the Commonwealth will go, whoa, let's get this stuff right first. Possibly, but really important. We should be so proud. If you look at the origins of vet fee, fantastic, all the right stuff, all the right stuff. Just when they made a decision to go for growth, and I mean government, maybe some of the checks and balances weren't there. And the Commonwealth is still saying they don't have the capacity to stop a provider until the most recent changes in terms of expenditure. So even if they were in the media for rorting, they couldn't stop the providers, just like. I'm not sure how that works either. So it's complex. There's notions now about, again in the election, 70% of funding should go to a public provider, 30% to privates. Again, I don't quite understand the logic to that. I said earlier that I'm an advocate for TAFE. I want TAFE to have appropriate roles defined by government, because they do carry some service obligations and they should be funded, no question about any of that. But I do think the benefits of a quality market, so we're competing with quality providers, everybody, I think there's a lot of benefits in that. That's certainly my fundamental view, as you'd probably expect. But you know, government can't have its cake and eat it too. So you can't put money on the middle of that table and say, let's just see if we get some education. So you can't have a laissez-faire model. That's now the learning. I think that's now a lesson in education, particularly vet, is that doesn't work. So we need monitoring, we need management, we need intervention. Those providers, those numbers I talked to you earlier, if someone had jumped on that when they'd grown from 200,000 to 20 million quickly and said, stop, you're going to convince me that you're still delivering the right product, again, we wouldn't be here talking today. So we have to learn these lessons. And Simon earlier talked about this cyclical nature, that we seem to come back to the same argument we had, and he's right. And I think vet reform and market reform is very similar. The key is, are we learning from it? And let's hope that we do. And by design, I talked about vision. I talked about being on the road. There is no national vision at the moment for vocational education and training. That's my view. So there's lots of money, there's lots of investment, lots of programs, but why? Is it mainly vocational now? Are we trying to meet the skill needs of a future economy? Are we Are we the education of sector of last resort? Are we what? And we need governments to articulate that, because that changes everything. That means we can actually have a meaningful discussion about reform. So I'd like to hear some of that debate in the election. I don't sense it will come because they don't seem to think it's sexy. But government have got a really important role in designing the marketplace after that. Forget about the federation stuff. That'll happen over the medium to long term. But there's more important parameters at the moment for us to contemplate around the design of this wonderful system. And then, of course, government also has a role around that monitoring that I talk about and management. So there's no panacea, is my view. We won't fix this today because largely it's working well. The satisfaction rates here in Western Australia are second to none. So you guys are doing a fantastic job, both public and private. You should be proud of that. Elsewhere, they're very good as well. They're very good as well. So the core of what we do is wonderful, just wonderful. Now, one of our challenges is government's also talking about, I mean, they just speculate, but believe me, when you hear speculation, you should assume they're going to do it, and therefore you have to come up with an argument. But NCVR will tell you that only about 40% of our graduates go and work in the industry that they studied. 40%. Right? That includes apprenticeships, which are higher, but overall. So what that tells you, if there's a view that government should pick winners, in other words, government should say, we'll fund these quals, but not these, that's tough. I've been in government where we did that, and it's not a linear choice anymore. You know, graduates will go and work. They may come back to that industry, but it's really difficult. So again, the key is portability. We should be educating for portability in the labour market, and integrity. The qual should mean something. If the qual's high quality, who cares? Move on. So they're the challenges we've got in this sector, and the question is what's the debate look like? Where in this fine country is there a room where people are talking about this stuff? Apart from us, of course. But people who are designing a future funding model for the states and territories, are designing a future vocational education and training market. Now, the word vocational we should never, ever dismiss, and I'll tell you why. Colleges with good relationships with the industry are almost always fantastic. But if you look at those colleges I talked about earlier that had those massive growth, I sat in the room with one of them once where we were negotiating with them about their future role with ACPET. And they were asked the question, so you've got X number of students, it was a lot, what's your strategy with industry? And the CEO said, what do you mean? Well, it's vocation, so what's your strategy to make sure industry knows about your graduates, their industry standard? The answer was, we don't have any relationship with industry. Now, I'm talking a college with, 10,000 students. We've got careers counsellors. And you sit there and going, but industry drives our system. So, yes, at some qualification levels it's appropriate to focus on experience and knowledge and the like, but all I'm saying is let's not move or lose the notion of quality. And by the way, some of those numbers might make you think, gee, Rod's negative. I'm really not. I'm saying that's the reality. It's this big. Let's celebrate and build the future system based on all the good stuff. And it's powerful. It's truly powerful. Now, when I brief the media on the good stuff, they go, yeah, we'll do that one day, but that's not where we're focused at the moment. And you go, well, can't we focus on that? And of course, no, it's too much fun bashing providers up. Federation reform, we've probably covered this in the last debate. Vet funding is declining. That can be a crisis. That's probably an emotional word, but we want it fixed. The Productivity Commission, it's a fact. The funding levels are dropping. And yet skill demands, qualification demands are certainly not dropping. The schmozzle thing, Cheryl touched on it in the Federation debate. And Simon rightfully says, well, who are these people that have a problem with different funding models in different jurisdictions? It might be less of an issue over here, but in some states, for some employers, it's a challenge. There are national employers. Toyota's one who wanted a national approach to its skills programs. It couldn't do it. It couldn't do it. And by the way, it wanted to do it with TAFE, but it couldn't get agreement across all the states and territories to have one TAFE to host it. I just think that's crazy stuff. So I think that's the negotiation. Simon's talked about that, and I think vet fee helpers kill that off. I don't think anyone, I wouldn't have thought, would have the courage to push that too hard. So what I think the reform agenda looks like, it's the national partnership. 12 months. Now the national partnership, for those of you who aren't close to it, that's how the states and territories get their cash. So that's where the discussion, where the Commonwealth says, here's what I want you to do for it. And here's what I want you to do around competition. So what level of contestability, what's the focus on apprenticeships and traineeships, and I do think that's growing again, which is a good thing, because that is an important part of our sector. So that's where we want to do it. Well, I think vision's important. The governance and funding, so that's a challenge as well, because we talked about employers. Michael Lavarch said employers drive our system. Now, when I say to industry groups, employers drive our system, they say, where? How do we drive the system? Because it's more student choice now, right? Employers have got a big role to play in training packages, as complex as that is and as hard as it is. And I think the design of training packages is challenged by that number I mentioned to you earlier, around 40%. So packages are very much occupational focused, but should we have a little bit of more problem solving and a bit of curriculum, if you like, as part of the competency agenda? That's a question. I don't have an answer to it. I've got a view, but so there is no clear national body now. Remember ANTA? ANTA used to be driven by employers. I'm not saying we go back to ANTA, but potentially there's an argument for a strong independent body to start driving this sector again around priorities. Now, Simon and others, including myself, will go, hang on, let's learn from the past and make this better. But all I'm saying is I'm not sure where the debate is. I think it's fine. Contestability and choice. So the key issues, I mentioned all of these earlier. So any questions about that? Discussion? Debate? I might have it wrong.
Rod, look, I just wanted to pose a question to you, I guess. In the light that it seems to me the response to the quality and funding blowouts and things that have occurred within VET, the response has been to tighten the restrictions and the compliance for everybody, so making everybody jump through more hoops in order to meet, I guess, the challenges that have come up. Is there any interest at a federal or state level in just focusing those efforts on the providers that aren't meeting the quality standards and leaving the rest of the industry to continue doing the good job that they've done?
Absolutely the right question. So you're those numbers I mentioned earlier in terms of the numbers of providers that are causing grief, it's not that big a challenge. You wouldn't have thought. Deal with that. Please deal with that. Whether you're a funding body, whether you're a regulator or an industry body, deal with them. I think there's a concern, there's a nervousness politically and in government about, well, hang on, this is so big, if we just do that, it'll pop out somewhere else. I don't accept that. I think you're right. If you look at the quality of the results from the far majority of our system, and if government says, and they're right, and we're all in the same, there's never enough money to do everything, just focus on the bad guys. Now, you don't even have to do that. If you look at, let me get this number right, the top 20 providers in vet fee help accounted for 80% of the growth, right? Well, focus on that. That's a risk strategy. I'm not saying they're all dodgy. They're not. Some of them are great colleges, but that requires looking at. And then it's about following the outcomes trails and the data. States and territories have got very rich data around enrolment patterns, around completion rates, but the Commonwealth doesn't have access to that. The government fix it and monitor it, intervene on it and stop it. So you're right, that has to be the position. We've certainly been advocating that let's, in this redesign in 2017, and when we put our paper in, this is what we'll be saying, is that the market's actually working fantastically well for TAFE, for private providers in some of these areas, except for the providers that aren't offering anything but are reaping in lots of enrolments. Fix that, and then the sector will work. So I absolutely agree with your point. Absolutely. Have we won the battle? No. but we'll certainly be making strong submissions to whoever the new government is after July 2. But I think that the reform submissions are due at the end of June. Any other questions about that federation stuff or vet fee help? No? Okay, so let's have a quick look at the election, because whilst I have trouble focusing on it all, it is where there are some signals about what the new system might look like. But can I say not much. There's a little bit there. I like vet being in the spotlight, but not in the notion of how the word dodgy, it's the new nomenclature in our sector. I rarely use it because I think it misrepresents what we do, but that's still fun. Now, the coalition, of course, so the Turnbull government are I almost said hiding behind. I don't really mean that, but they've released 2 discussion papers, one on higher ed, one on vet fee help, and that's sort of signalling the future. So in a sense, they would argue we'll have an evidence-based approach to this. I'd like to see a few more signals, to be honest. The challenge is it a loan program or skills development program? If it's a loan program and it's working well, why are we even talking about a lot of this stuff around caps and which quals should be funded? Because it's a student. A well-informed student will make a better choice about what they love and therefore what they're going to be good at than a government person can. But of course, there's been some perverse outcomes, hence why they're worried about. And of course, it's a complex sector to make choices in. Again, there's some evidence about that they'll put some funding limits on. I think we have to accept some of that. There's talk about income thresholds. They might drop that. So instantly you'll have a different income threshold in vet than you might have in higher ed. So is that a perverse outcome to go to higher ed when someone might be better suited to vocational education and training? This is the stuff that has to be, I'm hoping, discussed and debated, not determined away from the sector. I'm hoping we get a chance to talk about that. And if I have a fundamental position, it's a simple one. Government have to be better at selecting providers. Make sure there's educational history. Make sure there's quality measures in place. We can help. I think as peers, we can help. Both public and privates can help with decisions about educational quality. And if it's a pop-up provider that's invented tomorrow to deliver vet fee help the next day, well, don't let them in. Don't let them in. So there's more work to do on that. I don't want too many barriers, but that stuff seems important to me because then you're competing against your peers in quality. Labor's announced a review of vet. I absolutely support that. Now that's about all those data I showed earlier around declining funding levels, vet being used as a balancing item potentially for budgets. We've got to stop all that. So I think a review would be good, and it would also establish what priorities might come out for the future. Labor's also saying, they want to save TAFE, and I get that. I want TAFE to be strong in a future economy as well. But the best public institutions can compete in the marketplace. Yes, they will have community service obligations, which I accept. They're hard to define. Well, I've tried it. They're hard to define, but they are there. They might be about a building. They might be about a particular program, a particular community. I get all that. That has to be clearer. I don't get the 70% call. I don't think it's as simple as that. I think the benefits of the market can help. And the $8,000 cap, now I've copped some flack from my own members about me opposing a cap, saying, well, hang on, it's the only way we can save integrity. What I've said is, I'm not against caps, but it can't be one amount. If you deliver aviation and it costs you $90,000 to deliver a qual, and you have a person who comes from a disadvantaged background, what is that, an upfront fee? Is that 80 grand you're going to ask them to fine? It's crazy stuff. Now, government will go, oh yeah, we'll give them an exemption. Well, that's not good enough. If you're going to have a cap, you have to have it industry-based and work it out intelligently. Sure, that might cover some courses. Now, by the way, some TAFE programs are over those limits as well. This is not a public-private issue. This is about saying, come on, we're clever people, I hope. We can help you work this out. Don't just go, it's 8,000 and convince us if we're wrong. Because you know as well as I do, once they say 8,000, and if it's legislated, it becomes 8,000. So then you'll struggle with gaps, you'll struggle with upfront fees, equity becomes an issue, quality becomes an issue. Because if it costs you now $12,000 to deliver a particular diploma, and you're told it's now $8,000, and you think the $4,000 won't be paid by a student, guess what? You've got to cut your cloth. This is your lifeblood. It's not what we want. It's not the race to the top. We should have a race to the top in education. Now, this is challenging space. And by the way, Sharon Bird, the Shadow Minister, and Kim Carr, they agree with everything I've just said, but politically they're driven, their policy priorities are driven accordingly. Let's just face it, the vet fee help program in terms of the media, that's what that means, has been a mess. It has put contestability and choice at risk. I don't believe a marketplace should be 100% a market, and I don't believe in pure ideology, but I do believe in student choice. And if you ever want to read, this is how desperate my life is. If you want to read something, read the latest National Competition Review from Ian Harper. Now, you're probably sitting there thinking, this guy is weird. But it's a good read. And just read the educational chapter, because he gets it right. He goes, yeah, markets, if it's such an important decision that impacts the rest of a person's life, and Jared, your story is absolutely perfect for that. His choice about a Cert 2 at TAFE's changed his life. And you're a hard person to follow public speaking. I've learnt that. You were very impressive. But a person's got every right to have influence over that. Same as when you're at school, you know. Maybe students have less choice about what school, their parents tend to make those, but we want people to be able to make choice. But we want them to have integrity and to be protected. So that's where I'm headed there. We've sort of talked about that. So the higher ed discussion paper is just as important for our country. Now, non-university higher education providers, so if there's any of those in the room, you should object at that language, because why would you be called non-university? That's not what you are. You are independent higher education providers. Now, of course, there's about 140 of them in the country, delivering to around 100,000 students, and it's growing every year. The challenge is those students, for whatever reason, are full fee paying. Right? There's no government subsidy, so they're in more debt. Now, because of all the Senate inquiries that happened in the last year, we took students to these, and their stories are compelling. Why did you pick a private college when it would cost you more around the debt level? And it's because it's a different, you know this stuff, different learning environment, more intimate, smaller class sizes, access to academic staff. That's all really cool. But they've got to loan the lot. And the other part, of course, is they pay a 25% admin fee. So in terms of the election debate, we're certainly saying at least fix that. Why do they have to pay 25% more than if you went to university? It makes no sense to me. Equity, equity, equity. Again, both sides of politics agree with me, but it's about how do you fund it. If you look at the government's discussion paper, they say, well, there's a few ways. We could just wipe it, or we could reduce it to 5%, but make all higher education students pay it. So that means adding 5% to universities. A courageous decision, Minister, but one that would fund government-supported places for the independent college. Like, I think, the other one is to apply 25% to everyone. That would make more money for them, I guess. But so complex space. We do think there's a meaningful way through this debate. Pausing, no questions about elections? Well, in terms of just the educational stuff. We've got a bit of a program underway, can I say. We're playing in the election, but only about student choice. We're just saying our driver is we want student choice to remain an important principle. We're not telling people who to vote for, we're just saying engage in the politics of it and ask potential politicians and politicians about student choice. So the road ahead, again, I touched on some of this earlier. I want a national skills policy. I think that should be the first thing a new government lands on. And then government has to design the marketplace. Now, it happens at a state level. You know, if you're a state-funded provider, you get calls from government if things are going wrong, or if you're not delivering, or if you're over-delivering. They quickly put a cap on it. So that's the monitoring. Less done at a Commonwealth level than at a state level. And the barriers to entry is that stuff I covered off before. I think that's barriers, which is crazy. It's unusual for the private sector to say we'd support barriers, but I don't mean insurmountable barriers. I mean you just need to have some checks and balances in place to make sure the college has got everything in place. That's all. And I know we've got a regulator, but this is more about the educational commitment. This is more about the culture, the values of the company. Is it about education or isn't it? Regulation, I'm not convinced our regulators have got the right power. So if you're in higher education, you've got TEXA, probably not as well funded as ASQA, but if your enrolments are going up, their case managers bring you to the table and say, whoa, how's this working? It's a different model. I like it. They have some governance restrictions where you must separate academic decisions from commercial ones. I don't think that's bad either. So, and you talk to the independent for-profit higher education colleges, that's taken very seriously. So, it's interesting. So I think there's learnings there. Let's learn them. And of course, I've talked about the role of industry. So what is the contribution of the private sector in particularly vocational education and training? The last estimate, it'll be higher than that now, but it's about $6 billion a year. If you throw the international marketplace is an interesting one. That's worth $20 billion to the Australian economy, an enormous industry. In vocational education and training, private colleges deliver 90% of that. Now that's a good sign in terms of their capacity to deliver quality of education. So again, we've got a fantastic industry. We've just got to celebrate it better and deal with the perverse outcomes better as well. 100,000 people across the country are employed. There's 4,500 private RTOs. There's about 130, 40 higher education ones. And more than half of the private colleges train less than 100 students. Right? So that makes it hard when you say, let's have a transparent system. How do you get that data? I say to NCVR, surely you can provide a level satisfaction rates and students can see them. It's a big challenge across 4 million enrolments to get that granular data. It's really hard. So I'll let you off the hook, Kat. Government-funded providers, so government-funded providers enrolled 28% of students. Now, again, I acknowledge that includes the vet fee help stuff. The fee-for-service stuff. Private providers are a real part of our economy. There's no question, and we need to be better at it. So ultimately, it's about, I say, what road are we on? Is that light at the end of the tunnel? Is it light or is it a train? I fundamentally believe that our sector. It probably, in terms of perception, hit rock bottom this year. We've really struggled with some of the stuff that was happening. But I'm already getting a sense from good colleges, from government, from the media, that we're starting the track back. So we have to do that collaboratively, and we need to make sure that we learn. We don't come back here. Similar experience in international education when it fell over back in 2008-9. The key is we learn from that. And international education is suddenly growing again as well. So I hear industry players, colleges saying, is this sustainable? We need to make sure that we're putting everything in place. So that's good learning. So, we're trying to do our part as well. We're certainly in the Supreme Court at the moment, and that's never fun, around colleges we've removed from the membership. But that's just about saying to our members, listen, we'll try and protect your brand. It's taken us too long, but that's just sort of where it's at. So, look, I don't think I've ever used more PowerPoints in a presentation, but it was just to try and work you through all of the many issues that we've got. So, questions, concerns? Oh, no, hang on. I might faint. Jared.
No, I won't go too hard on you, and I'm really glad that I get to sit on a panel with you for a bit of discourse this afternoon. Which
it'll be fun.
I think an hour might be too short.
I agree.
So I might need your email address afterwards.
That'd be good.
But just throwing back to the portable skills point and transferable skills, is that if there are any futurists in the room that know more about it than I do, but from what I understand is that generally speaking, people change careers 6 to 7 times during their lifetime, and futurists predict that will grow exponentially in my generation, Generation Y, Generation Z, in that we gig, so to speak, between skilled positions, 12, 24-month contracts. So teaching and training for problem-solving skills, so teach to the problem and not the tool. So rather than teaching me that a screwdriver undoes screws, show me an engine block and say, take it apart. What do I need? I need screwdrivers. What for? Different sizes, bits and pieces like that. So the education model, does that cater, in your opinion, does our current VET education model cater for problem-solving teaching in the classroom and actually teaching transferable skills like communication and leadership and teamwork and stuff like that to actually transfer between skilled workforces, or are we kind of stuck in teaching competencies and you get a very specific outcome and you can't take it outside of your industry?
That's an insightful question, so thank you, Jared. And isn't that interesting? Because a lot of the data says that a lot of the jobs we're training for today won't even be here in 5 years. And it's really hard to see over that horizon. In terms of I'll answer your question on twofolds. In terms of educators, good educators, regardless of what's in the framework, do their best to do that. They absolutely are trying to give their students portability and problem solving. And, my father did that once. He gave me an engine block and said, I want you to change the oil, you work it out. Well, it turns out oil doesn't go in with the diff. But anyway, I learned a hard lesson. Maybe I didn't learn it, he didn't let me do it again. But our competency model, it's internationally recognised. The rest of the world loves our system more than we do, right? So it's really powerful. I think competency-based training is important. Our training packages are important, but training package change will never keep up with the challenge that you've articulated. So I think we've got more work to do about how to pipe in futurist stuff, if you like to pick up your phrase, so we are training for tomorrow. Because if only 40% of people are moving to a job, what you want is them to have problem-solving skills, communication skills. Employers still talk about employability skills. That's what they look for. I think a qualification framework, wherever you go in the world, can't keep up with that. It's about the various elements of that. I thought that was a beep. So good question. I think the answer to is yes and no. That's as good as I can do. The colleges are doing their best, but I think we need to make some changes to the framework to free them up, because colleges are scared of regulators as well. You go, hang on, you've got to teach this competency stuff.
You're talking about new regulations or new programs in 2017. We've seen the introduction of the LLN standards, which is, from my perspective, weeded out a lot of prospective students. They keep talking about cappings and all the rest of it. Is there not a better way to do it, more of a focus on vetting students that actually come into certain areas? Because, again, my experience is a lot of students are less interested, and this is by no means the majority, but a lot of students are less interested in the outcomes than they are of still maintaining their Centrelink payments. So even if they can get through that LLN, they know that they're never going to get to that income threshold, so they never have to pay it back. And they don't think forward that a $10,000 to $15,000 debt is going to impact them financially later. And all they really want is to be able to keep on the dole, if you like. So could you see that you have any influence in more vetting of students rather than capping fees and that sort of thing? Well,
I think that all the elements have to work together, right? And yes, there is that sentiment in part of the marketplace. And the risk to us in vetting students is not just to lock more out, because education is the pathway. So we heard a story today about Jared probably thought he'd never get to that income threshold, and I'm sure that's not a problem now. And so we need to use the vet sector. Sure, there should be appropriate academic tests around language, literacy and numeracy, yes, and their capability to finish that qual. See, there's a disconnect between vet fee help, which is diploma and above, and state level funding, which is Cert 4 and below. So if you're a provider that's just in vet fee help, you have a perverse incentive, even regardless of their academic quality, to enrol them in a diploma. That's wrong. You're linking it to academic progression. Yes, we've certainly raised that with the Commonwealth. It's about how would it be done. It's fine. The question was about academic progression, linking it. And I think it's a good question. Again, it goes back to this is a really complex problem, and that has to be part of the answer. I agree. And your question was, do we have influence? I don't know. It's really hard to know in the middle of an election who's got influence. Voters do, but we are certainly meeting constantly with both sides of politics to promote that, and we've been pushing the academic progression question. but we've also been pushing this disconnect. Because if someone comes to your college and they really want to enrol, I want them to enrol, but if they can't do a diploma, that's fine. Assess them and help them start where they should start. That's our system. I think there's another question back there, and then we're up the back.
Okay. Mine sort of follows on from this. We operate in a fairly low income region, and the impact of the increase in tuition fees for publicly funded training was fairly substantial, and we saw a collapse particularly in enrolments from women over the age of 24. And I sort of wonder whether the lesson from Vet Fee Help is that there's actually a hunger for affordable skills and training across Australia. And students who often don't have a great deal of confidence or understanding of the system believe the information they receive from the brokers and or the agents that they can undertake this training. And I think that there's been a fair hammering of Vet Fee Help because, yes, it has been a negative in the vet area, but one of the positives is it does show that the Australian populace at large wants to increase their skills, that people see that it's a way out, and that the irony is that people who are most disadvantaged actually have to work through the certificate 2 to 4, where they have to pay for it themselves before they can actually access a government-funded loan.
And I can't help but agree that that's a failure of public policy. So that's what a loan scheme should be about. We should be incentivising that, hey, get a good education and one day you might have to pay this back. It's the cheapest loan you'll ever get. And you should be able to access training. That's why the notion of a gap is so important in disadvantaged communities, because it completely rules them out. And we have to have a better system than that. It's not as simple as saying we can't afford it, so everyone chips in. If they can't afford it, they can't afford it. So what else can we do? And I like your language about there's this thirst for education. I think it's absolutely right. But again, complex problem, if there's a simple solution to it, which is sort of what's been promoted around some of this stuff, it'll fail us. It'll absolutely fail us. So I want to endorse what you've said. Regardless of the certificate level of the qualification, or regardless of the level of the qualification, there should be funding models that enables a student to engage. Now, if it's not publicly funded, they should be able to get an income threshold loan. That's how it's supposed to work. Now, of course, it has to be affordable as well. What scares government is they get advice that 40% of the vet sector won't pay it back. I'm not convinced that's true. I'm just not convinced with the changing economy that's true, but I wouldn't say that to Andrew Norton. There was a question up the back.
Thanks, Rod. A couple of themes throughout your innumerable slides were quality and student choice. In light of what's happened with Vet Fee Help and that small number of providers that's ended up tarnishing the whole sector, how do you think we can help students appreciate the difference between RTOs and differentiate between them in terms of quality? I'm not sure if it's understanding that the short duration and the low price isn't the be-all and end-all in picking what you're doing in vet.
Yeah, and I'm not joking, I lie awake at night on this problem, because if we can solve this problem, it restricts the marketplace to good colleges, and it means students can have confidence that if they make a wrong choice, it's just about what qual they've started on, and they'll get something out of it. Now, I don't think the answer is just with the regulators. Give your regulators more power, because that's proven not to be the best distinguishing factor. There's been various quality models developed over the years around, you know, that extra status, QETO and quality endorsed and all that sort of stuff. I'm wondering if the lesson actually sits in the UK, where they require their colleges to self-assess, right? But the distinguishing feature is that their peers, so it might be a panel of private and TAFE representatives, sit down and review your assessment instruments and some of your learning support strategies with a view to giving it the tick or not. So do your peers support that you're a quality college? And now I just wonder, I speculate whether that type of educational test, if you like, rather than the compliance one, might create an environment where quality colleges are delivering the programs that we want, and poorer commitment means they don't get in. That's just my view. Now, government's not ready for that discussion. Government want, well, hang on, that sounds too hard, it's black or white. So I've got ministers saying, well, Rod, they get through the regulatory step, tick. So therefore ACPET should tell us whether they're good colleges or not. Well, that's fine, but therefore we need those sorts of tests as well. And, you know, I'm here this week meeting with our members talking about that type of thing. What would that sort of test look like if that's what we do? So I think your question has to feature in the answer, but we're not quite there yet. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. I hope you got something out of it. I certainly did. Thanks for your questions, and I'll see you this afternoon.
Authorised by the Government of Western Australia, Perth.